You already know how to win at poker. You know the ranges. You know the concepts. You have studied the theory, reviewed the hands, consumed the content. You know what the right play looks like in almost every situation you face. And yet, here you are, watching another video, looking for the thing you're missing. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The thing you're missing isn't knowledge. It has never been knowledge. And every hour you spend adding more knowledge to a system that has a different problem is an hour that moves the needle in the wrong direction. It never was. Every player who plateaus at mid-stakes, every player who studies for months and stays stuck, every player who reviews their sessions and knows exactly what they did wrong and then does it again next session, they all share one thing: not a gap in their strategy, a gap between what they know and what they actually do when the money is real, the pressure is high, and the brain starts running its survival protocols instead of their poker training. Chip Reese, one of the greatest cash game players who ever lived, was once asked what separated him from the other elite players at the table. Players who had the same theoretical knowledge, players who had studied the same games, played the same stakes, put in comparable hours. His answer was not ranges, not GTO theory, not hand reading, not pattern recognition. He said, "When they play their A game, I'm really no better than they are. The difference is that they also have a C and D game. They become weak players when they steam. And just about all of them do. My edge is that I don't steam." Read that again, because that quote contains the entire answer to the question this video is built on. The edge wasn't knowing more. The edge was losing less of what he already knew when things went wrong. That is the entire game, not the ceiling, the floor. This video is about the gap, not the knowledge gap, that one you have mostly closed, the execution gap, the distance between the player you are in your best moments and the player you actually are on average, across all sessions, under all conditions, when everything is not going your way. Close that gap, and everything changes. The knowledge you already have becomes worth what you paid for it. The hours of study start showing up in the results. The ceiling stops mattering, because the floor finally caught up to it. This is not a video about a new concept. You do not need another concept. You need a clear diagnosis of exactly why the concepts you already have are not showing up consistently, and a specific structural answer to that diagnosis. Stay until the end. The final section of this video contains the one shift that produces all the others, not information, a restructuring of how you approach the game at its most fundamental level. Miss it, and nothing else in here will change anything. Here is a question most players never ask honestly. Not what is the right play in this spot, but when I know the right play, do I so often make a different one? The answer is not tilt, not laziness, not a lack of discipline. Those are labels. They describe the symptom. They do not describe the mechanism. The mechanism is this. Your brain operates on two separate systems. The analytical system, slow, deliberate, logical, is where your poker knowledge lives. This is the system that does the work during study sessions. It reviews hand histories, runs equity calculations, builds range models. This is the system you are using right now, listening to this video. The emotional system, fast, automatic, survival-oriented, is where your decisions actually get made under pressure. This system does not have access to your poker training. It has access to fear of loss, need for resolution, ego protection, and the primal discomfort of uncertainty. And under pressure, it runs faster than the analytical system can respond. This is where most players lose the game, not on the river, not at the turn, right here, in the gap between what the analytical system produced and what the emotional system decided. Not in the spots they never studied, in the spots they studied perfectly, reviewed carefully, understood deeply, could articulate in detail to anyone who asked, and then, when it mattered, when the money was real and the pressure was high, the emotional system moved first and the analytical system watched helplessly from the passenger seat. Here is what this looks like in practice. You are 3 hours into a session. Stack is down 2 buy-ins. You face a marginal river spot, a thin value bet that your analytical mind knows is profitable over a large sample. But the emotional system has been running a parallel calculation all session. I am already losing. A call means ending this hand faster. A big bet means risking more of a stack I am already underwater on. The check feels like control. You check. The emotional system made that decision. The analytical system will review it in your session notes tomorrow and mark it as a mistake. And the cycle repeats because reviewing the mistake does not address the mechanism that produced it. Patricia Cardner, a psychology professor who interviewed professional players with over $1 million in lifetime winnings, found that what distinguished them was not strategic superiority during peak performance. It was not that they knew more. It was not that they played better when everything was going well. It was decision quality consistency across all conditions. Good sessions, bad sessions, tilted sessions, fatigued sessions, sessions where the variance had been brutal for hours. Not their A-game ceiling, their floor under stress. This is the part nobody talks about clearly enough. You do not need a better A-game. You need a more reliable floor. And those are built through completely different kinds of work. And let me show you what the gap actually costs, not in one dramatic hand. In the invisible math of 1,000 small decisions across a year of sessions, a player who knows the right play and executes it 85% of the time, but drops to 65% execution during difficult sessions, losing sessions, or emotionally charged spots, is not a winning player who runs bad. They are a player whose average execution rate across all conditions sits somewhere between those two numbers, weighted heavily toward the conditions that produce the worst execution. Because bad sessions are the ones where the most important decisions happen. Stop right here. This is the part most players miss, and it is the most expensive thing they miss. The biggest pots of your poker life almost never happen when you are playing your best. Think about the truly significant hands of your recent history. The ones that defined a session. The ones that shifted a month from profitable to losing, or from losing to barely salvaged. When did those hands arrive? In what state were you playing when they happened? They happen when the session has gone sideways, when you have been 3-bet 4 times in a row, when the player you read perfectly is running hot, when the variance has been cruel for 2 hours, and your patience has been ground down to almost nothing. That is precisely when the largest decisions arrive. And that is precisely when execution rate drops the most. This is why 2 players with identical strategic knowledge, who could describe each other's ranges with precision, who could both articulate the correct play in any given spot, who study from the same materials and understand the same concepts, can have wildly different results over the same period. Not because one has a better A-game, because one has a better floor. One of them maintains 65% execution under pressure. The other maintains 80%. Over a year, across thousands of hands and hundreds of sessions, that 15% difference in floor execution rate compounds into an enormous financial gap. And it never shows up as a knowledge problem in the session notes. It shows up as bad luck, bad runs, tough spots, coolers, the language of variance, masking the reality of architecture. Performance psychologist Alan Longo, who has spent 5 years coaching high-stakes poker players, documented this pattern across his entire client base. The consistent winners were not the ones with the highest peaks. They were the ones whose worst sessions looked most like their average sessions. The floor was high. The variance in performance quality was low. That consistency was the edge, not any specific strategic concept they knew that others did not. This changes where the work should go. Not into more knowledge. Into the structure that makes your existing knowledge survivable under pressure. And that is a completely different kind of work from everything you have been doing. I need to stop here and address something directly, because what I'm about to say is the most commercially inconvenient truth in poker education, and the most important one. Most poker content, including most of the content on this channel, teaches you what to know. Hand-reading frameworks, cognitive bias identification, decision-making under uncertainty, thinking levels, anchoring protocols, the biology of loss aversion, the mechanisms of cognitive override. All of it is real. All of it is valuable. All of it is incomplete without this next piece. Knowledge without a delivery system fails under pressure. Every time, without exception. This is not a character flaw. It is a structural reality of how the human brain operates under stress. And the solution is not more knowledge. It is a better delivery system. The delivery system is what this video is building toward, and it is documented in complete depth, with hand examples, session frameworks, and executable protocols in the mind of a grinder complete collection. 10 ebooks, built as one integrated system, not isolated concepts. The full architecture, tilt psychology, pre-session calibration, floor building routines, decision quality systems, self-anchoring frameworks, and the mental game structure that makes everything else you have learned actually show up in your results. Here's what the gap is costing you right now. You are a better player in your head than you are at the table. That distance between the player you are during study, during review, during content consumption, and the player you are in a real session, under real pressure, with real money at stake, has a real dollar value. You can estimate it roughly. Take your best session from the last month and your worst session from the last month. The difference between those two performances is not mostly variance. Most of it is execution gap. And most of that execution gap has nothing to do with what you know, and everything to do with how reliably what you know survives the specific pressure conditions of a real session. The collection closes that gap. Systematically, chapter by chapter, starting with the most expensive leak you have and working through all of them with precision. $29.90. Less than one buy-in at most stakes. Less than what the execution gap costs you in a single month of play. Less than the difference between your best session last month and your worst session last month. And that difference, as we just covered, is mostly not variance. It is architecture. We are also launching Collection 2. Every person who purchased Collection 1 is receiving the first ebook of Collection 2, free, delivered directly to their email, already being sent. Because this is not content with products attached, it is a system. The link is in the pinned comment. The Collection 1 price closes when Collection 2 launches as a full package. No countdown, no theater, just how launches work. There are 4 specific behaviors that separate the player who knows how to win from the player who actually wins. 4 observable, measurable differences in how they approach the game. Not at the level of strategy, but at the level of architecture. The first is how they treat the space between knowing and doing. Average players treat poker knowledge as the destination. Study enough, learn enough concepts, and the results will follow automatically. They believe the pipeline from knowledge to execution is self-completing. Elite players understand that these are 2 separate activities requiring 2 separate systems. They study the concepts, and then, separately, deliberately, they build routines for deploying those concepts under the specific pressure conditions of real play. The 2 activities are not the same. They do not produce each other automatically. Most players only do the first one and spend years wondering why the second one never happens. The second difference is how they define a good session. Average players measure sessions by results. Win sessions feel like confirmation that they are playing well. Losing sessions feel like evidence of bad luck or bad play, and the ambiguity between those two is itself a source of psychological damage. Elite players measure sessions by decision quality. A session where the decisions were sound and the results were poor is a good session. A session where the decisions were poor and the results were positive is a dangerous session, because it rewards a process that will cost money over time. This distinction is not philosophical, it is structural. Players who evaluate decision quality instead of results build accurate feedback loops. Players who evaluate results build distorted ones. And distorted feedback loops produce distorted improvement curves. The third difference is how they handle mistakes in real time. Average players make a mistake, register it emotionally, frustration, self-criticism, the internal narrative of a player who is not performing at their level, and carry that emotional weight into the next decision. The mistake does not just cost the chips it cost. It contaminates the next 3 decisions, and the 3 after that. The error compounds silently, invisibly, across the rest of the session. Not because they are weak or undisciplined, because they have no real-time system for processing errors without letting them corrupt what comes next. Elite players have a protocol. Short, specific, practiced until it is automatic. It takes 5 to 10 seconds. It acknowledges the mistake as data, extracts the relevant information from it, and releases the emotional charge attached to it. Then the next hand begins clean. The mistake is information, not evidence of identity, not a signal that the session is lost. Information. The fourth difference, and this is the one most players never see, is how they define what they are trying to get better at. Most players who plateau are not failing to improve. They are improving consistently and genuinely. They add knowledge every week. New concepts, refined ranges, more sophisticated reads, better understanding of solver outputs and their applications. The problem is not the quality of what they are adding. The problem is the system they are adding it to. Adding strategic knowledge to a system that cannot deliver it under pressure is like upgrading the engine on a car with broken steering. The car gets more powerful. It does not get more accurate. At high speed with broken steering, more power is a liability. Every additional concept you learn without building the delivery system for it is another unit of horsepower in a car you cannot control when it counts. The ceiling of your poker game is determined by your knowledge. The floor of your poker game is determined by your architecture. The mental and behavioral systems you have built to deliver that knowledge under pressure, fatigue, emotional charge, and the specific kind of stress that only real money in a real session against real opponents actually creates. Most players obsess over the ceiling. They add more knowledge. They study more hands. They review more sessions. They consume more content. All of this raises the ceiling. None of it raises the floor. And here is the brutal mathematical reality. A high ceiling with a low floor produces a lower average than a moderate ceiling with a high floor. The floor is what you actually deliver. The ceiling is what you occasionally access. The results are determined by what you deliver consistently, not by what you can do at your best. The floor rises through a completely different kind of work. Through the deliberate identification of the specific conditions that degrade your execution, what kind of session, what kind of sequence, what emotional state, what stake, what opponent type, and the construction of specific interventions for each of those conditions. Not general resilience, not generic mindfulness, specific personalized protocols built on accurate self-knowledge. This is what Jared Tendler means when he talks about the Inchworm Principle. Your performance range moves like an inchworm. When you add knowledge, you raise the ceiling. The front end moves forward. The inchworm extends. But if the back end, the floor, does not move, the average position of the inchworm does not change meaningfully. The length of the inchworm increases. The average position stays roughly the same. The only thing that changes your average result over the long run is raising the floor. And the floor rises through architectural work, not strategic work. These are different disciplines. They require different activities, and almost all poker education focuses exclusively on one of them. Right here, this is the entire answer to the question this video is built on. You already know how to win. What you have not yet built is the system that lets you use what you know when you most need to use it. Let me be specific about what floor building actually looks like. Because most players, when they hear mental game work, picture something vague. Mindfulness exercises, journaling, breathing techniques. That is not what this is. This is engineering. The first element is an accurate floor map. You need to know exactly when your execution degrades. Not a general sense that you play worse when tilted. Specific. After how many consecutive losing hands does your call frequency increase? At what stack depth does your aggression become inconsistent? When 3-bet in the first orbit, does your opening range on the next hands tighten defensively? These are measurable patterns. They exist in your session data. Most players have never looked for them because they have never understood they are looking for the floor, the specific failure modes of their delivery system, not the ceiling. The second element is trigger identification. Every execution failure has a trigger, a specific event or sequence of events or emotional state that precedes the degradation. Finding the trigger is more valuable than any strategy correction, because a strategy correction only fixes one decision. A trigger identification and intervention system fixes every decision that comes after that trigger. It is a structural repair, not a patch. The third element is a real-time reset protocol, a short, specific, practice sequence that runs between significant hands, particularly after mistakes, after bad beats, after any event that charges the emotional system. Not a recovery from tilt, a prevention of the cascade that turns a single bad moment into a compromised session. The protocol takes 5 seconds when practiced. It produces disproportionate returns across every session it is deployed in. The fourth element is the pre-session calibration routine. Fedor Holz has spoken about this explicitly as a core component of his preparation. Elliot Rowe has documented it across hundreds of high-stakes coaching relationships as the single most underutilized tool in the serious player's repertoire. The emotional baseline you bring to the table determines the quality of the cognitive environment in which every decision gets made that session. A corrupted baseline, stress carried from outside the game, unresolved emotional charge from a previous session, fatigue that has not been honestly accounted for, produces corrupted decisions. Not because you suddenly know less, because the delivery system for your knowledge is running on a damaged operating system. The pre-session routine is the reboot. It takes 7 to 12 minutes when practiced consistently. It is the single highest return on time investment available to a poker player. Know your floor, find your triggers, build the reset protocol, execute the pre-session calibration. These four structural elements are what the transition from knowing how to win to actually winning looks like in practice. Here is where the identity shift happens, and this is the part that determines whether everything else in this video changes anything for you, or whether it becomes another piece of content you found valuable and then integrated into nothing. Most players identify as students of poker. They measure their worth by how sophisticated their understanding has become, by how well they can articulate the concepts that separate serious players from recreational ones. They know their ranges. They understand their mistakes. They can describe GTO theory and cognitive bias and the mechanics of tilt. The identity is knower. And the activity that feeds that identity is learning more. Always more. This identity is not wrong. It is incomplete. And the incompleteness is expensive. The player who actually closes the gap between knowing and winning does not switch from knower to executor. They add a second identity, architect. They become someone who not only learns what is true about the game, but actively builds the systems required to make that truth available under pressure. The architectural identity asks different questions, not, what should I know? But, what have I built that makes what I know survive contact with the real game? This shift changes everything about how you spend your time and how you evaluate your own progress. Study sessions look different. Review sessions look different. What you are looking for in your hand histories changes. The criteria for a good week changes from how much you learned to how much of what you know showed up under the hardest conditions. The metrics you track change. The self-assessment changes from knowledge inventory, how much do I know, what new concepts have I added, to system audit. How well is what I know actually getting delivered when it matters most, when the money is largest, when the session has gone most wrong? There is a concept in organizational learning called the knowing-doing gap, documented by Jeffrey Pfeffer and Robert Sutton across dozens of high-performance domains: medicine, athletics, business, military strategy. The finding is consistent across all of them. The gap between knowing the right thing and doing the right thing is not closed by more knowing. It never has been. It is closed by deliberate practice of doing, which in the context of poker means deliberate practice of executing under the specific pressure conditions of real play, with specific feedback loops calibrated to catch execution failures, specific error correction systems that run in real time rather than in review, and specific architectural interventions built for the individual failure modes of each player. The players who close the gap do not study more. They study differently, they build differently, and they evaluate themselves differently, not against the ceiling of what they know, but against the floor of what that knowledge consistently delivers when the session is hard and the pressure is high and the emotional system is running fast. There is one more layer to this, and it is the most personal one. The reason most players do not do this work is not that they do not know it exists. Most serious players have heard some version of this idea. They understand intellectually that execution matters, and they do nothing with it. Not because they are lazy, because the architectural work requires a kind of honesty about themselves that is more uncomfortable than studying a solver output. To build an accurate floor map, you have to be willing to see exactly how far your execution falls during your worst moments. You have to look at the sessions where you played your worst, the sessions you would rather not review, the ones where you know what happened and would prefer not to examine it too closely, and not explain them away as variance or bad luck or difficult opponents or unavoidable coolers. You have to ask with uncomfortable precision, What exactly happened to my thinking in this session? When did the degradation begin? What was the specific trigger? How many decisions did it affect before I noticed? What did each of those decisions cost? And what was the cumulative price of the cascade? That level of honest self-examination is the price of the architectural work. It is not an intellectual price. The examination is not complicated. It is an emotional price. The discomfort of seeing yourself accurately when the accurate picture is less flattering than the one you have been carrying. And most players are not willing to pay it, not because they lack discipline or commitment, but because the identity of a serious poker player who studies hard and works consistently is more comfortable than the identity of a serious poker player who consistently underperforms their own knowledge. The most important phrase in that last sentence is their own knowledge. Not the game, not their opponents. You are not underperforming the game. You are underperforming yourself. And that distinction, once you see it with clarity and hold it without flinching, changes the direction of all the work. Because you cannot close the gap with the game by adding more knowledge. The game does not care how much you know. The game only responds to what you execute. But you absolutely can close the gap with yourself. Through architecture, through systems, through the deliberate construction of the mental infrastructure that makes everything you already know actually show up at the table, consistently, under pressure, when the sessions are hardest and the decisions are most consequential. This is the shift, not from average player to advanced player in terms of what you know. You are already advanced in what you know. From advanced player who knows how to win to advanced player who actually wins, because you built the system that delivers the knowledge you already have to the table in real time, under the conditions that actually occur. That system, that architecture, that is what the grinder actually builds, session after session, not a bigger ceiling, a floor that holds. Here is what changes when the floor rises, and I want to be specific about this, not inspirational, not motivational, specific and structural. Losing sessions stop cascading. A bad run of cards, a sequence of bad beats, a cooler that would previously have contaminated the next 2 hours of your decision-making. It gets absorbed by the system you have built. The reset protocol runs. The calibration holds. The emotional system registers the loss and the architectural system processes it before it can corrupt the next decision. The next hand begins clean, not because you feel better, because the system did its job. Study becomes more valuable. Every concept you learn, every range refinement, every cognitive framework, every strategic principle is now being delivered by a more reliable system to the situations where it matters. The knowledge has the same ceiling it had before. You knew it before. But now it survives contact with pressure more consistently. The gap between the ceiling and the floor is smaller. The area under the curve, your actual average performance across all sessions and all conditions, is higher. Not because you know more, because more of what you know is showing up. Your floor becomes your standard, not your ceiling. The floor is what you consistently deliver across all conditions, all session states, all emotional environments. The ceiling is what you occasionally access when everything aligns. Elite players are not those who access the ceiling most often. They are those whose floor has risen closest to the ceiling, narrowing the gap between peak performance and consistent performance until the two are nearly indistinguishable. And here is the honest accounting that makes all of this concrete and personal. Take the player you are in your best moments, focused, rested, reading the table clearly, executing with precision, making the thin value bets and the difficult folds and the aggressive 3-bets that your analytical mind knows are correct. Now take the player you are in your worst moments, down 2 buy-ins in a session, the reads not landing, the emotional system running hot, execution degrading quietly and continuously below the level of your conscious awareness. The difference between those two players is not knowledge. It is not talent. It is not work ethic. It is architecture. The system that one version of you has and the other does not. Close that gap. Not with another concept. Not with another hour of solver work. With the system that makes the concept survive the session. The floor is where the money lives. The floor is where the grind actually happens. The floor is what decides, over the long run and the large sample, and the honest accounting, whether the player who knows how to win is actually the player who wins. You already have the knowledge. You have had it for longer than you think. Now build the system that makes it real. And this started with a question most players have asked themselves. Late in a losing session, at the end of a losing month, in the quiet after a session where they knew exactly what they should have done and did something else. You already know how to win. So why aren't you? The answer is not a concept you were missing. It never was. The answer is an architecture you have not yet built. System that makes your knowledge survive the specific conditions of real play, real money, creating real pressure, real opponents creating real discomfort, real sessions where the variance is cruel and the emotional system is loud and everything in your biological hardware is working against the quality of your thinking at exactly the moments when the quality of your thinking matters most. Here is the practice. Starting tonight, after your next session, do not open the hand histories looking for strategic mistakes. Do not open the solver to check your frequencies against optimal outputs. Do not review the bad beats or the coolers or the spots where you got unlucky. Do one thing that most players never do. Open a blank document and write down the moment in that session when your thinking first started to degrade. Not the hand where the money went in wrong. The moment that preceded it. 15, 20, 30 minutes earlier. Sometimes earlier than that. When the floor first started to drop. When the emotional system began to outrun the analytical one. When the calibration shifted from clean execution to reactive decision-making. That moment exists in every session where execution fell below your normal level. Your job is to find it. Find that moment, name it specifically, write down what preceded it. The sequence of events, the emotional state, the specific trigger. That trigger is your floor map. And that trigger, identified precisely and addressed architecturally, is worth more to your long-run results than any concept you could study tonight or any session review you could run against a solver. Build the floor map, find the triggers, construct the reset protocol, execute the pre-session calibration. Review sessions for execution failure, not just strategic error. These are not optional additions to your poker education. They are the foundation that makes your poker education worth what you invested in it. Subscribe if you want more of this work. Not more information, but more architecture, more structure, more of what makes what you know actually show up. Share this with one player who is studying seriously and not seeing the results that studying should produce. That player is in your circle, and the YouTube algorithm responds strongly to shares in the first hour. So if this hits something real, that is the most useful thing you can do right now. You already know how to win. Now build what makes that true at the table. Not sometimes, not on your best days. Consistently, under pressure. When the session is hard and the decisions are consequential. When it counts. That is the standard. That is the grind. Now go build it.